The broadcast of the regular meeting of the Minneapolis Policy and Government Oversight Committee will now begin.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Lisa Bender. I'm the president of the Minneapolis City Council and the chair of the Policy and Government Oversight Committee. I'm going to call to order our regular committee meeting. I'd like to note for the record that this meeting has remote participation from council members and city staff as authorized under Minnesota Open Meeting Law, section 13D.021, due to the declared state of local public health emergency. At this time, I'd like to ask the clerk to call a roll to verify the presence of a quorum.
Councilmember Reich.
Here.
Gordon.
Here.
Fletcher.
Here.
Cunningham.
Here.
Ellison. Councilmember Ellison. Goodman.
Present.
Cano.
Here.
Schrader.
Here.
Johnson.
Here.
Palmisano.
Present.
Jenkins.
Here.
Ellison. President Bender.
Here.
There are 11 members present.
Let the record reflect that we do have a quorum. Colleagues, the first order of business today is to receive a presentation from our Congresswoman, Ilhan Omar. It's my pleasure to welcome you into this new virtual City Council environment, and we really look forward to your presentation. So I'll welcome you, Congresswoman, to our meeting today.
Thank you, Council President Lisa Bender, and hello and good afternoon to all of the City Council members and city staff. It's really great to have the opportunity to be able to join you and directly talk to you during this crisis, even though we can't presently be together. I've been reaching out to our local municipalities and having a conversation with them during this crisis, because we realize that it's important for us to continue to have the conversation. And today I just wanted to talk a little bit through about some of the priorities that your city has as it relates to the pandemic and how we can help on a federal level. I know especially during this crisis, it's been really important to me and to many of you that we work seamlessly at a federal, state, and local level. Normally in these discussions, when we reach out to our local municipalities, we go through our normal legislative priorities, but I know this is a special time where we are faced with some challenges and some difficulties. And so I wanted to give you a little bit of an update of what we've been doing on a federal level. As many of you know, we passed one of the most robust relief packages ever assembled, putting funds directly into the pockets of Minnesotans. And as the regional whip for the Midwest in the Democratic caucus and as the progressive caucus whip, I've been involved in many of the negotiations to make sure that we have the boldest package available. And as many of you know, we've introduced the legislation to suspend rent and mortgage payments, to authorize monthly cash assistance, to make SNAP available online. And I've had the pleasure of working with some of you on the City Council on these initiatives. I was thrilled to see that Minnesota has been approved for online SNAP ordering, and we're still working on making that a national, because we realize that in this critical time that relief is going to be really important for folks that utilize those resources. It was an idea that was generated by the office of City Council member Andrew Johnson, my former boss. I don't know if he's on the call at the moment. And I've been thrilled to have the ability to be working on that. And in a few weeks, we're going to do a virtual town hall on those benefits to talk through what that rollout would look like in Minnesota and what more assistance they will need from a federal level. I was also really excited to have the opportunity to introduce legislation and have it pass into law to make meals free for our kids and make it available to the millions of students, not only in our district, but across the country, who rely on school meals, and to have that be implemented while the schools are closed. I want to just applaud quickly Minneapolis Public Schools for distributing over 1 million meals here in Minnesota since the pandemic began. They just crossed that 1 million threshold this week. I know we still have a lot of work that we need to do during this difficult time, and my priority has been in trying to assist every single one of you as we try to deliver for our constituents. I'm well aware of the situation cities like Minneapolis are in with the projected deficit and added cost. So last week, I was proud to vote on the HEROES Act, which was a $3 trillion coronavirus relief package. The bill passed the House, and we're waiting to negotiate it in the Senate. Under the HEROES Act, Minneapolis would receive an estimated $540 million in 2020 and $270 million in 2021. These numbers are just estimate at the time, but it's a significant step in the right direction. The HEROES Act also includes $2 billion for Workforce Initiative and Opportunity Act employment training programs, something that I know it's very important to Minneapolis Workforce Development Board. I also wanted to thank you for your work and outreach with the immigrant communities and communities of color in our city. As we know, the public health and economic impact of COVID-19 is disproportionately hitting minority communities. That's why I found it absurd and cool that tax-paying mixed status couples and families have been excluded from relief that we've passed on a federal level, including the 1,200 stimulus checks. And I've said after the passage that we needed to do something to recoup those benefits for them. So I introduced the legislation, which I'm pleased to report was included in the HEROES Act. The HEROES Act also will shield undocumented immigrants working in essential fields from deportation and make sure they are eligible for many of the federal programs that we're working on right now. The HEROES Act would also allow undocumented people who lack healthcare coverage to qualify for no-cost testing, treatment, and vaccines related to the coronavirus. And as many of you know, I believe housing is a human right. And so we've taken every step to make sure that we are securing dollars and guaranteeing folks the opportunity to stay housed during this pandemic. And so I wanted to thank you for the work that you have been doing on a city level to work on an emergency housing program and to create funding for the Stable Homes program. That $3 million in housing support is quite tremendous. And so the overwhelming demand on those funds, though, underscore the ongoing need that we have in our community. And I know, Council President, you and I have been in discussions on this, so has Alondra Cano and Jeremiah, and with their help, I was able to introduce the Rent and Mortgage Cancellation Act. Also working with folks in Richfield and in some of our other municipalities that would cancel rent and residential mortgage payments for the duration of the current national emergency declaration. The federal government would provide funds to landlords and lenders, allowing them to recoup their losses as long as they agree to abide by a set of fair renting and lending practices for a period of 5 years. And I wanted to just thank you all for including that into your Minneapolis IGR legislative agenda. It's been really exciting to see many of the city councils across the country also lending their support to our bill. In addition to my bill, the HEROES Act that I mentioned earlier, that passed last week, included $175 billion in rent and mortgage assistance, $11 billion for homeless grants, $4.75 billion for public housing vouchers, and $2 billion for public housing operating fund. But more immediately, we must continue to advocate for a state level on the extension of the current eviction moratorium. And I know, Council President, this is something that we've been talking about to make sure that it doesn't go off ramp, so that renters have the time to be able to pay their rent. And if they're in the hole for, you know, $4,000, $5,000 when the moratorium is lifted, that could cause a catastrophe for many of our families. So we've seen, we have also seen the resurgency of homeless encampments in certain places across the city. Last week, I talked to the governor's office about the emergency shelter, homeless, and eviction. In response to the questions that we've raised with your help, Council President Lisa Bender, we know that $330 million emergency response package was passed by the Minnesota legislature. $26.5 billion was allocated for an emergency services program to expand the shelter capacity and support staff needs for homeless programs. And the Minnesota legislature also approved a one-time appropriation of $5.5 million for expenses secured by DHS housing support program in the months of April, March, and June of 2020. And from the Federal CARES Act, I pushed for in Minnesota is to expect to receive about $7.5 million to pass through federal funding that can be used to support the range of efforts, including but not limited to homeless prevention, emergency shelters, and rapid housing and street outreach. As many of you are well aware, many of our small businesses are really struggling during this time. While programs administered through SBA, like the PPP, have been an important lifeline for some businesses, the program has had many issues and many of the money went to large, not small businesses. So we'll continue to push for improvement in these programs, and we're looking actually at passing legislation in the next couple of days. Hopefully, our office has been working really hard with small businesses and connecting them with resources. And we hope that you all continue to engage us in raising some of the concerns that businesses in our areas have, so that we can assist them. And in closing, you know, I've taken too much time. Maybe I'll stop for some questions, but I really just wanted to say thank you so much for this opportunity to come address you. We've been working every single day to connect workers to unemployment assistance, helping folks that are stuck overseas to get home safely, assisting our incarcerated people who are getting the opportunity to be let out to safely be housed within our communities. We're working again in assisting small businesses. We've always said we believed in co-governance, and I know that in order to provide the best service for our shared constituents, we have to collaboratively work together. And so I really do appreciate this opportunity to come and chat with you.
Thank you, Congresswoman. I'll pause and see if there are any comments or questions, and there are already council members jumping in. So first, Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Madam President, and good to see you, Representative. Thank you so much for all your leadership. It's just been really incredible, and we're so appreciative of it. And I was wondering, we know obviously the House took action on aid to local governments across the nation. As you mentioned, we've heard conflicting things from the Senate side. I know the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell even hinted at wanting cities and states to be able to declare bankruptcy, which is a really terrifying thought because local government impacts people's lives across the nation in so many different ways. What what's your feeling or take on the likelihood that the Senate will eventually come to the table for local government aid? And do you have any idea where something might land with that in terms of the size of a package? I'm guessing they probably won't be as ambitious or generous as the House, but it would be really great to know if you have any insights into kind of where things may land and how soon.
That's a really good question. Thank you so much for that. You know, in our conversation with Speaker Pelosi, we are all in full understanding that that cities and states truly do provide essential services. This is going to mean jobs lost for folks, whether it is within law enforcement, whether it is our firefighters or the city staff that are constantly working to make sure that they are providing the essential services that our communities need. And so in our package, there is $1 trillion that's supposed to go to states and cities. And the speaker has said that was the ask that came from mayors and governors. That is a hill that she's willing to die on. And so we believe that within the course of negotiations, much of that money will stay in. And I know that she's not going to compromise on our effort in trying to deliver the funds that are going to be so crucial for our states and cities.
Thank you.
Thank you. I see Councilmember Cunningham next.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Congresswoman. It's been wonderful to see you here today, so thank you. I just wanted to just briefly say thank you for the bill that you brought forward. I think that it's really powerful and amazing and really would be impactful, has huge implications for the North Side. I just want to specifically say thank you within the Affordable Housing Acquisition Fund for intentional prevention around massive corporate purchases and real estate speculations like what happened after 2008. That was a huge issue that happened in North Minneapolis with single family homes being rapidly acquired. Large swaths of my ward's housing stock was bought up, over 200 properties by one company, and that Wall Street ended up making like $27 million off of ultimately. And so so I really appreciate you bringing that to the federal level because trying to fight that at the local level is really, really challenging. So thank you so much for raising that and incorporating that into the conversation. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Congressman Cunningham. We have been really trying to push that part of our legislation. I know that housing and rental assistance is much more feasible, and so we were able to compromise on that and get that passed through. But the acquisition fund is something that we are still pushing and fighting for. We found an unlikely partner in Chairwoman Maxine Waters and Speaker Pelosi, and we have a commitment that will be part of the negotiations that might actually get accomplished as we move forward, because it is actually understood, right, that the kind of devastation we are looking at when it comes to the housing market is going to be much worse than the 2008 crash. And so we must do everything that we can to make sure our communities are not going to be further devastated. And so I I'm really glad to see that part resonated with you, and that and maybe there is a way that we can use both of our voices to uplift that part of my bill, so that it does actually make it out in negotiations.
I would love to be of support in whatever way that I can. This has been a frequent topic of conversation since the crisis began for me. It's just a lot of advocacy around that. I think that when we talk about racial equity, we see very clearly home ownership versus renting, in Minneapolis, that there's a clear racial disparity there. However, I represent quite a few women of color, Black women in particular, who are homeowners, who also are cash poor, low wealth. And so, but, it's like we buy homes in order to build generational wealth, and right. And so it's like, but they are so at risk that they're falling through the cracks. And so, so I really, really appreciate your work on this. So thank you, Madam President, and thank you, Congresswoman.
Thank you. Council Vice President Jenkins.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you, Congresswoman Omar. I did want to just say Ramadan Mubarak. Congratulations on your very recent nuptials. And also just thank you for connecting me to the CBC, the Congressional Black Caucus national calls that have been happening around the COVID-19 pandemic and crisis. Those weekly, sometimes almost daily phone calls have been very, very informative and very helpful as we think about policies here, policy perspectives here in Minneapolis, but also understanding what's happening at the national level. There's a lot of hope riding on the HERO Act legislation. I hope you guys can get it done. One of the things that I have been trying to incorporate in those CBC calls is really hopefully making sure that communities, that policymakers and legislators all over the country are including LGBT identified communities in their response to the crisis, and more specifically LGBT and people of color, transgender people of color, into their response. And so anything that you can do to help bring that message forward, I would, myself and millions of Americans who identify as such would appreciate it as well. Thank you so much for being here today, and thank you for your service in the United States Congress.
Thank you so much, Vice President Jenkins. It's been really valuable to have the daily calls, because sometimes they're not weekly. There's few of them within a week, with the Congressional Black Caucus, as we try to think through what it means to collaboratively respond to this pandemic with the public health crisis, but the economic crisis that it's causing in many of our communities. Many of the social economic injustices that have persisted and existed in our societies for decades have now just been laid bare with this pandemic, and the opportunity, I think, for Black leaders across the country to come together, to have a conversation, to think through not only how to immediately respond, but how do we also respond to what this crisis will ultimately and unveil for our communities, and your lens truly as not just a Black leader within our community, but also speaking to a community that has been invisible and now more invisible even so, and to be a voice for Minnesota when we don't have enough, right? Enough Black leaders, and we don't have enough voices speaking for those who are even more marginalized within a marginalized community, has meant a lot. And I really do appreciate you stepping up and devoting your time and energy in doing that. We are leading town halls, and each member is sort of taking up a cause to amplify. And so I would love for the two of us to explore whether we would like to lead a conversation on this topic and think through who we would invite and what that could mean for a national conversation. So I will have Connor on my staff and Kendall follow up with you so that we can get ourselves on the schedule for these town halls and have this discussion more broadly and maybe have Council Member Cunningham join us as well.
No, I think that's a wonderful idea, and I can think of one person to invite, Alfonso David, who is the new African-American president of HRC, to be a part of that conversation. So looking forward to hearing from Connor. Thank you, Congresswoman.
Thank you. Councilmember Palmisano.
Thank you, Council President. Welcome, Congresswoman Omar. It is great to see you. I really appreciate my colleagues, Council Members Johnson and Cunningham, for really helping to start to illustrate just how bad it is for cities. I feel like part of your coming to us here and giving us this presentation is to be able to go back with talking points about impact. And clearly us as a body is absolutely worried about disparities and how they're amplified in times like this. I did just want to give you a couple of specific numbers to take away as we move forward to try to be responsible and govern well for the rest of the year with these changes, how this year has gone much differently than we planned last December. We are looking to make up as a city $165 million in revenues that we had thought we would get and won't. You know, some of that is simply things like a collection rate for parking, but some of that is, as Councilmember Cunningham mentioned, is about taxpayers and property taxpayers. Some of those are homeowners that were unable to pay their first half property taxes. And some of them are small business owners that are really hoping to make it, but also couldn't pay their first half property taxes. Our revenues, in terms of what we expected to get in to pay for things that the city does, was down 8%, and that is a surprising number to our budget office. That means these people didn't feel that they could make payment on their first half property taxes due. So I just offer that in case it's helpful. We also as a city are looking at or projecting that by the end of the year that we'll have perhaps $66 million in COVID related costs. And as a city, we're working hard to make sure that we document that such that if in the event that we can get reimbursement from the state or the federal levels, that we have all of everything in place and it's clearly outlined what those costs were for. So thank you for being here. And I just wanted to be able to share with you what one part of your district is feeling and just how dire that need is for federal aid. Thanks.
Congresswoman Palmisano, that really is an important piece to us having the opportunity to advocate on a federal level. I have been really encouraged by the outreach and constant conversations that President Lisa Bender and Mayor Jacob Fry have offered to me and our office in regards to keeping us informed on some of the budget struggles that Minneapolis is facing, some of the difficult decisions that you all will ultimately have to make if there isn't a clear path to getting relief. And it has been really important to be in conversations with Councilwoman Cano and Councilman Jeremiah with regards to property taxes, as we thought through what our rent and mortgage cancellation bill would mean, and formulating a piece of legislation that would ultimately also allow for homeowners to continue to be able to pay their property taxes. We've been working with State Senator Carrie Dietzick and State Representative Mike Howard in trying to think about some creative ways with the property taxes, and thinking about ways that we can offset some of the challenges cities and counties might feel, and in our advocacy, truly with the speaker in trying to make sure that the amount of money that is on the table doesn't get much less, has been with that in mind, in thinking through the kind of economic burden that you all are going to be in. And Minneapolis truly is a representation on some level to what some of my other cities are feeling. They don't have the kind of economic stability that Minneapolis might have. Some of them have many more challenges, and so to hear the pain that Minneapolis is feeling is to know that there is more pain within the other cities that I represent, and so that has made us act urgently and support legislation that ultimately isn't perfect, but we know that what it would provide would mean much to the cities that we represent and to our constituents.
Thank you. Councilmember Palmisano.
Thank you. I really appreciate that answer, Congresswoman. I did want to make one small clarification. I said something wrong. I said that our revenues came in 8% less than what we would typically get, or we're planning to get from property taxes for this first half. In fact, it is 20% less. We do expect that by the end of the grace period, the few-month grace period, that we will get 12% of that in. So I just wanted to mention that because it's a small but important clarification in the amounts.
It's more dire. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councilmember. And that's, I think, as you mentioned, Councilmember Palmisano, partly because Hennepin County allowed folks to defer their payment without financial penalty, in order to help families through this initial part of the shock. But it's one of the many variables that we have, not knowing whether it will fall at that 8% estimated or higher as the months go by. We have Councilmember Cano.
Thank you, Madam President. Deep gratitude to you, Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, for all of the work and heavy lifting you have been doing during this very, very challenging time. Very thankful for the outreach that your staff has done with us locally, particularly your district director, Kendall Killian, who's been a powerhouse participant in our weekly Monday afternoon Latino COVID-19 response meetings, where we have gotten updates from your office frequently. So I did want to just take this opportunity to just focus a little bit on the issue of evictions. And as we all know, this is an issue that impacts a lot of families throughout the city. And many of these families are being either harassed or pressured, either willfully or just because of the situation, to pay rent and to consider themselves at risk once the declaration of emergencies are lifted. And so these are direct messages that they're getting from landlords. Again, not trying to judge the landlord, but just identifying the problem here that Governor Walz did extend the declaration of emergency into June 12th. And then at that time, in June 12th, which is less than a month away, we will find out again if he's going to re-extend it or not. And of course, that is directly connected to the moratorium on evictions. So one thing I had asked our Attorney General's office is if there was a way for a task force or a convening of elected officials across different government arms to come together to figure out what we do. Because obviously none of us want to be imagining a world where there will be mass evictions in the middle of the summer, where I think the pandemic has the ability to spread even more in Minnesota. And certainly we don't want to be in that situation, but we can't pretend that that's not a potential reality, and we shouldn't not be preparing for it. And so, I've dug around a little bit, and some people said, well, why don't you just connect with the Tenant Resource Center? The Tenant Resource Center is a staff level initiative, mostly housed out of the county, Hennepin County. It doesn't include a statewide purview. And I know folks are actively participating in that at the staff level to deliver services and to troubleshoot the current conditions. But what I'm speaking more about is how are we as elected officials holding each other accountable to this space and time, knowing that we could have two or three different scenarios play out in the middle of the summer, either mass evictions, a potential bill that's passed, which we would still need to communicate to our constituents, or advocacy that needs to happen together to get to the place of getting a bill. And now I would assume that any type of initiative or measure to address the issue of evictions is connected to a direct subsidy of the bank industry. And so looking at this, I'm looking at this as a bailout for the banks. I don't really see any other way that we get out of it. But I would love to hear thoughts either from my colleagues or from our Congresswoman about, what should we be doing with the next 30 days that we have on our hands? And, let's hope that the governor extends or renews the declaration of emergency. But we also know that at the same time, the economy is going to get more and more complicated as these payments don't get made and as people lose jobs. I mean, I was on a call with Greater MSP yesterday, and they informed me that, the state of Minnesota is slated to lose 1 million jobs within the next, 6 to 9 months, and that Latinos are unfortunately disproportionately represented in that loss of jobs. So, so I'd love to just hear advice and just, just from other folks, like what's our plan? What do we want to do? Thank you.
So that, I mean, you and I have talked about this a few times now. I did discuss this particular issue with Council President Lisa Bender as well. We've been thinking through what an ultimate end really to this anxiety about the lifting of the eviction moratorium could mean. We've been in conversations with the governor's office, one, in trying to see if there are legal ways in which even after the emergency declaration is lifted, he can continue with the eviction moratorium while people stabilize themselves economically. And so that's something that we're exploring and a question that we are pursuing at the moment with the governor's office. Secondly, Madam President and I have been talking about what sort of external powers that exist within this that we can put pressure on, like the banks, and seeing what that would ultimately look like. We've also had conversations around what are within the powers of the Attorney General. The Attorney General and I did a visual town hall on evictions and thinking through what his office can continue to do once the eviction moratorium is lifted. And so your idea of putting a task force together actually would be an excellent idea, because it would help put all of us in a room to formalize and craft, I think, an actual plan and see, what I can do on a federal level, what you all might be able to do on a municipal level, what can be done on a state level if we had people like Attorney General Keith Ellison on that task force, and also had some advocates, thinking through maybe even having members from the county boards on there. I think there is an opportunity for us to think big and to think collaboratively, as you are suggesting, and we should explore that. And I don't want us to end this conversation without having a follow-up plan on this. And so I will just suggest that my staff, as they're listening, to reach out to all of your offices and see if this is something that we are able to do and devote, I think, some energy into sort of crafting an action plan, because June is here. For folks who haven't been able to pay their rent on April 1st, May 1st, June 1st, to expect them to come up with 3 months missed payment on July 1st really isn't ideal. And it sounds a bit absurd, knowing how economically challenged many people are already. I know Council President told me that the majority of the people who applied for the rental assistance program would have already qualified for it before this pandemic hit. And so we know people are how they're housing insecure already to begin with, and to expect somebody who barely was able to come up with their month's rent to now, without having income to come up with 3 months plus the current month is not a feasible thing. And so we should be, as leaders, collectively thinking about what this would mean and how do we proactively act. I think every single conversation I've had with the governor and his staff, or every conversation I have had with Speaker Pelosi and her staff, has always been about us thinking through not just how do we make an impact today for folks, but how do we actually mitigate the kind of devastation that would come if we're not thinking directly about addressing some of these economic challenges that our communities are having.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Omar. I really appreciate you considering taking the leadership to bring some of these minds together on this at the elected official level. And I do think it's a gap that is in the field right now, and I think it would be wonderful if you help to fill that gap. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Council Member. Is there anything else anyone would like to say or ask? I'll just follow up. I think that idea, Congresswoman, of a task force focused specifically on eviction policy is such a great one. And I think sometimes we're so focused on talking about funding, especially at the legislature, that these policy solutions to the eviction crisis get lost. And certainly there's a funding piece here as well, federally, state, locally. But I feel that there are always so many more things that we could do if we can get people around the table to talk about all of the other ways that we can work together to prevent eviction. And I just think that this is such a ripe topic that, there's a couple more things I wanted to say about it, and thank you for your leadership on it. I think this idea of a rent cancellation approach sounds far-fetched to some people, and it's one of these places where we have to keep working to stretch our imagination and understand why that idea sounds impossible. Because very quickly the federal government was able to put in place protections for all of the mortgages in the country that are backed by the federal government and Fannie and Freddie. And of course that's easier because those relationships are already there. The federal government has already stepped in to support home ownership in so many ways that those support mechanisms are there. But we were able to understand that those mortgage protections also apply to rental properties, and come with that a eviction prohibition for buildings that have federally backed mortgages. And we're able to get a list of all of the buildings in Minneapolis that have that status for 5+ unit buildings. And then we weren't able to get the data for those smaller 1 to 4 unit buildings. And while it's not a majority of the units in our city, it's a decent number of rental units that have those protections and those opportunities for the landlords, who also, many need financial support now as well. So I think there are places in our housing system where there's lots of, safety nets in place, particularly around homeownership. And then there's lots of places within our housing system that don't have any protections or catch, for people who need it. And so I just want to thank you for your leadership, both, logistically on creating the bill, but also your thought leadership and stretching to think about the need to fill that gap in our housing policy systems federally, and to understand those particular needs that renters have in our communities. And of course, this is a problem not only across CD5, but across the state of Minnesota. So I think there's so much we can learn from communities around the state whose housing situations might look a bit different than ours, but have very similar dynamics. I mean, even last year before the crisis, 10,000 Minnesotans were evicted, and in greater Minnesota, 3/4 of those folks lost their homes. And so if you add in the economic crisis that we're facing, it's just pretty hard to imagine what our state would look like if we didn't have better protections in place. So thank you again for that and all of your other work. We've had lots of conversations about our budgets and the challenge that Minneapolis is having, all the other local governments in CD5 as we wait for the legislature to debate the CARES Act funds. But, we're hopeful and appreciate your efforts there too. And I don't see anything else, so I will just thank you so much for taking the time to meet with us today and share what you're working on, and for your accessibility and your staff as well. I know many council members have asked questions over the recent weeks, and we've just appreciated the timely responses and the follow-up very much.
No, thank you so much for having me. And I think just your last point, I wanted to quickly say, it is easy, I think, to often think about putting protections in for people that are not that vulnerable. And we always have a hard time protecting those that are the most vulnerable in our community, which kind of is like an oxymoron thing to work through, because you would want to have protection in place for the people who are the most vulnerable in our communities, and somehow that's not the easiest thing to do, as we found in these positions of influence. And so our work and commitment has to be in advocating for those that are most vulnerable in our systems, in our institutions, and try to take the issues that seem unpopular, but are the most logical ones, and push them forward. And so I really do appreciate all of your partnerships in being able to do that. It means a lot to say, I'm advocating for this because my cities are advocating for it. My state believes in it. And that ultimately makes the conversation a lot easier. So thank you all for doing that for us and everything we've pushed during this pandemic and before, and for everything that you're doing for our shared constituents. So thank you.
Thank you again so much. And we don't have any action on this item, so we'll just leave you with our thanks, and we'll be able to proceed now to the rest of our agenda. We have 4 public hearings, which are all associated with land sales. So I will make sure our CPED staff are ready. The first hearing is on the proposed sale of city-owned property located at a specific address. I'm pausing because I know a while ago at the beginning of this meeting, we had a couple of people who were signed in to speak on item 3. I just wondered if they're still here, because I would be happy to take up item 3 first to accommodate those people who would like to speak on that item. Does the clerk's office know? Yeah, I see there are still 2 callers. So why don't, without objection, I take up item 3 first, which is a land sale, as they all are. And then that will allow the folks who've been waiting patiently to speak. So this hearing is on the proposed sale of city-owned property located at 2003 Hillside Avenue North to Wilson Molina for $20,000, subject to conditions. Or if that closing fails, then authorizing the sale of that property for the same amount to Auspicious Living LLC, which is subject to the same conditions. And Mr. Ramadan is here with a staff presentation on this item. And I know we had a long first topic item, so we'll just make sure that CPED is on the call and ready to go. It looks like we're still waiting for the staff. And the clerk is correcting me on the address. So I have that address listed as item 3. So I'm just pulling up the agenda electronically so I can respond to the clerk's comment here. Oh, I see, because item 1 was the congressional presentation. So item 3 is the land sale at 810 Thomas Avenue North. Thank you all. So I'll just sort of pause and ask one more time if anyone from CPED is here to talk about these items.
Madam President, while the staff is working, I will say I believe that Mr. Ramadan from the CPED department, who was earlier on the call, is just experiencing some technical troubles. So if we can just wait a moment, he'll be ready with that staff presentation on item number 3, which is the land sale for 810 Thomas Avenue North.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Clark, and no problem, we will wait. And now actually it looks like we are all set. So Mr. Ramadan, we've switched the order so that we can take up the item, which is at 810 Thomas Avenue North. And that is because we have 2 speakers who've been very patiently waiting on the line to speak on this item. So if you could do the 810 Thomas Avenue North item first. That is sale to Yusuf Ali for $35,000 subject to conditions, or if that falls through, authorizing the sale of that property for the same amount to Vision Development Group LLC, also subject to conditions.
Hello, this is Yusuf Ali. So I don't have any comments, but I'm just calling in.
Thank you. We are just waiting for the staff person who's presenting this item to get set up with the technology. So I had seen a note in the chat that Mr. Ramadan was here in the meeting, but now not hearing any progress. We could also move on to the consent agenda while we work out the technical details for the 4 public hearings. Great, so we will go ahead and move to the consent agenda, which will probably take 10 minutes or so just for the folks who are waiting for those items. So the consent agenda will take up now before the public hearings. If any council member would like to pull any items off, please just let me know. There are 14 items on today's consent agenda listed as items 6 through 19, and I will read those for the record. Items 6 and 7 approve the settlements of legal claims and authorize the city attorney's office to execute documents necessary to effectuate those settlements. These details of those specific cases are outlined on the meeting agenda. Item 8 authorizes grant applications to the Metropolitan Council Livable Communities Demonstration Account and the Livable Communities Demonstration Account Transit-Oriented Development for the 2020 round of grants for specific projects that are listed in the agenda. Item 9 approves the assessment and amendment of redevelopment contract with the Longfellow Station Commercial to 3801 Hiawatha with new project terms. Item 10 authorizes the grant application to the Women's Foundation of Minnesota for its COVID-19 Women and Girls Response Fund for $10,000 to provide a direct local assistance program for those most impacted by our vulnerable communities, most vulnerable to COVID-19. Item 11 is acceptance of 2 grants from the Minneapolis Foundation totaling $5,750 to provide 2020 census-related outreach for historically undercounted communities in North Minneapolis, and passage of a resolution to appropriate those funds to the city coordinator's office. Item 12 authorizes a zero-cost multi-year contract with Wireless Information Network for the design, installation, maintenance, and operation of a carrier-neutral cellular distribution antenna system for the Public Service Building project. Item 13 is contract amendment for the 2020 Housing Opportunities for Persons with AIDS funding in a total amount not to exceed $2,375,278 and extending those contracts through May 31st, 2023 for tenant-based rental housing assistance. Item 14 is a grant acceptance totaling $100,000 for the Safe Routes to School program for the President's Bicycle Boulevard. Item 15 is receiving and filing the 2019 annual report from the Special Service District and authorizing year-end budget procedures for those districts listed on the agenda. Item 16 authorizes a contract amendment with Thomas & Sons Construction for traffic signal work for revised signal systems, storm sewer, and pedestrian and curb ramp improvements in a total revised amount not to exceed $3,455,000. Item 17 authorizes a contract amendment with Tyzac Concrete for traffic signal work for revised signal systems and pedestrian curb ramp improvement projects. Item 18 is approving the layout for the Queen Avenue North Boulevard Bicycle Boulevard project between 2nd Avenue North and 44th Avenue North, and authorizing negotiation with private property owners to acquire easement and additional right-of-way if necessary for the project. And item 19 is the acceptance of the low bid for Minger Construction Companies in the amount of $2,135,235 to provide all materials, labor, equipment, and incidentals for the Hennepin Avenue sanitary sewer replacement phase 2 project, all in accordance with city specifications. So I will go ahead and move the consent agenda. I will see if council members would like to pull anything off of the consent agenda for a discussion or discuss any items. Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam President. I don't want to pull anything off the agenda. I just wanted to speak to item number 18 just briefly, the Queen Avenue North Bike Boulevard. This has been underway for quite some time, and the final product, I'm so excited about the design, and I want to just make sure that I say thank you to Public Works staff, Mike Samuelson and Amy Morgan, for working so closely with my staff and with me to make sure that we are able to have inputs, stay abreast about what's happening. I'm very excited to see this project happen, and I'm very grateful for the very diligent work of Public Works staff to make this happen. So thank you.
Thank you. Council Vice President Jenkins.
Thank you, Madam President. I don't want to pull anything off the agenda either, off the consent agenda. I do want to speak to item number 8, the the Metropolitan Council LCDA recommendations, and just speak to a project that wasn't selected or prioritized, Family Tree Clinic, which is a clinic that provides much needed affordable and affirming healthcare to LGBT identified people and primarily transgender people. And they are relocating to Minneapolis from St. Paul at Franklin and Nicollet. You know, in this time of public health crises, and we know that these kinds of challenges are going to persistently be a part of our landscape at a time when our federal government is making healthcare inaccessible to those communities. Specifically, I really want to encourage my colleagues who serve on those committees and the staff to take into consideration the social impacts of our decisions, as well as the financial or shovel-ready kinds of concerns that have been mentioned. And in fact, this project will be breaking ground in September, and so seems to be shovel-ready to me. It was not prioritized, and that's unfortunate. But I just want to really encourage folks to think about the social impacts, as well as the sort of financial considerations that go into prioritizing these types of projects. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. Anything further on the consent agenda? Seeing none, the consent agenda items are before us. Clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Reich,
Aye.
Gordon,
Aye. Aye.
Fletcher, Cunningham,
Aye.
Ellison,
Aye.
Goodman,
Aye.
Cano,
Aye.
Schrader,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Palmisano,
Aye.
Jenkins,
Aye. No on item number 8.
President Bender.
Aye.
There are 12 ayes on all items except number 8. There are 11 ayes and 1 nay.
Thank you. Those items will be recommended to the council for approval on Friday. Now we will return to our public hearings, and Mr. Ramadan is joining us by phone. Thank you for working out that technical issue with adaptability, and we will begin with the item, which is the property located at 810 Thomas Avenue North. Thank you.
Thank you, Council President Bender and members of the City Council, and thank you for your patience. I've been here the whole time. I don't know why I was knocked out when I couldn't talk or be seen, I guess. So let's get started with 810 Thomas Avenue North, which is a sale through Minneapolis Homes. Policies for the program were established by the City Council on December 11, 2015, and on February 10, 2017. The staff recommends the sale of 810 Thomas Avenue North to Yusuf Ali for its appraised value of $35,000, subject to conditions. If Yusuf Ali fails to close, to approve the sale to Vision Development Group, LLC, for its appraised value of $35,000, subject to conditions. Background information: 810 Thomas Avenue North was acquired on April 30th, 2018 from Hennepin County tax forfeited land. The staff marketed this property to an open house held in January 2020 with a notification sent out to now over 3,000 persons. There were 7 applications received for this project, or for this parcel. The property was constructed in 1916 as a 1,496 square foot, 2-bedroom, 1-bath, single-family house. The purchaser intends to rehabilitate 810 Thomas Avenue North as a 2-bedroom, 1-bath, single-family home to live in as the owner-occupant. The alternate purchaser intends to rehab 810 Thomas Avenue North as a 3-bedroom, 2-bath home to be marketed exclusively to owner occupants. CPED's construction management staff reviewed the scope of work and estimates submitted by the applicant and confirmed that they are sufficient to meet the minimum rehabilitation standards of the program. Notification was provided to the Northside Residents Redevelopment Council on February 26, 2020. They recommended another owner occupant who ranked lower for only meeting minimum program standards, but they also ranked Vision Development as the alternate purchaser. I believe we've been waiting for a while, and we have him here with us today, Mr. Yusuf Ali, on the line to speak to this. Are there any questions that you have of me?
Thank you, Mr. Ramadan. I'll see if there are any questions from council members. I don't see any. I will go ahead and open the public hearing. There will be a public hearing on each of these items. Would anyone like to speak on the property at 810 Thomas Avenue North? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing. Is there a motion to approve this item?
This is Councilmember Ellison. I'll move to approve.
Councilmember Ellison has moved the item. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Reich.
Aye.
Gordon.
Aye.
Fletcher.
Aye.
Cunningham.
Aye.
Ellison.
Aye.
Goodman. Aye. Connell.
Aye.
Schrader.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Palmisano.
Aye.
Jenkins.
Aye.
President Bender.
Aye.
There are 12 ayes.
That carries, and that item is adopted and will be recommended to the council on Friday. Item 2 on the original agenda is the land sale at 610 34th Avenue North. Mr. Ramadan.
Council President Bender and members of the City Council. Again, 610 34th Avenue North. There's a sale through Minneapolis Homes, but what we again mentioned our policies and procedures were set first on December 11th, 2015, and then on February 10th, 2017. There was only one applicant for this particular parcel, that was Wilson Molina, and staff recommends the sale to Mr. Molina for $15,000 subject to conditions. The city acquired this parcel on April the 30th, 2018 from Hennepin County Tax for Credit Land. And the property was constructed in 1915 as a 1,160 square foot, 1-bedroom, 1-bath, single-family house. Mr. Molina intends to rehabilitate this property as a 2-bedroom, 2-bath, single-family home to be marketed without restrictions. Our CPED construction management staff did confirm that his estimates are sufficient to meet the program standards. The McKinley neighborhood was notified on February 26, 2020, but they did not respond. I don't know if Mr. Molina is available to speak today. Are there any questions for me?
Thank you. Are there any questions from council members? I don't see any. I will go ahead and open the public hearing and see if there are any speakers who would like to speak on this item. There are no callers signed in, so I will close the public hearing. Is there a motion on this item?
Madam President, I will move approval of this item.
Councilmember Cunningham has moved approval. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, clerk will call the roll.
Councilmember Reich.
Aye.
Gordon.
Aye.
Fletcher.
Aye.
Cunningham.
Aye.
Ellison.
Aye.
Goodman. Aye. Connell.
Aye.
Schrader.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Palmisano.
Aye.
Jenkins.
Aye.
President Bender.
Aye.
There are 12 ayes.
That carries, and that item will be referred to council on Friday. The third item is the property located at 2003 Hillside Avenue North. Mr. Ramadan.
Okay, yes, this property, 2003 Hillside Avenue North, President Bender and members of the council, is also being recommended for sale to Wilson Molina. But if Mr. Molina fails to close to approve the sale to Auspicious Living LLC for its appraised value of $20,000 subject to conditions. 2003 Hillside was acquired on May 16, 2018 from Hennepin County tax forfeited land. And the property was constructed in 1900 as a 2,024 square foot, 2-bedroom, 1.5 bath single family house. The purchaser, Mr. Molina, intends to rehabilitate this as a 3-bedroom, 2-bath single family home to be marketed without restrictions. The alternate purchaser, Auspicious Living, plans to rehab the house as a 4-bedroom, 3-bath home to be marketed exclusively to owner occupants. Notification was provided to the Jordan Area Community Council on February 26, 2020. They did not make a recommendation. I'm not sure, again, if the alternate or the purchaser are available today, but are there any questions for me?
Are there any questions for staff? Seeing none, I will open the public hearing. See if anyone would like to speak on this item. Seeing none, I will close the public hearing. Is there a motion on this item?
Councilmember Ellison here. I will move approval of this item.
Councilmember Ellison has moved this item for approval. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Reich.
Aye.
Gordon.
Aye.
Fletcher.
Aye.
Cunningham.
Aye.
Ellison.
Aye.
Goodman.
Aye.
Kano.
Aye.
Schrader.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Palmisano.
Aye.
Jenkins.
Aye.
President Bender.
Aye.
There are 12 ayes.
That carries and will be recommended for approval at the council meeting on Friday. The fourth and final hearing today is for the proposed sale of city-owned property located at 1131 James Avenue North. I'll turn it over to Mr. Ramadan for this last item.
Council President Bender, members of the City Council, the staff recommends the sale of 1131 James Avenue North to Pedzo Star Properties LLC for its appraised value of $15,000 subject to conditions. And if Pedzo Star Properties LLC fails to close, to approve the sale to Tyhan LLC for its appraised value of $15,000 subject to conditions. 1131 James Avenue North was acquired on May 16, 2018 from Hennepin County tax forfeited land. There were actually 16 applications for this particular property. The property was constructed in 1979 as a 2,112 square foot, 3-bedroom, 2-bath single family home. The purchaser intends to rehabilitate 1131 James as a 4-bedroom, 2-bath single family home and has a pre-approved buyer who will live in the home as an owner occupant. The alternate purchaser intends to rehab 1131 James as a 3-bedroom, 2-bath home to be marketed exclusively to owner occupants. Notification was provided to the Northside Residents Redevelopment Council on February 26, 2020. They recommended 2 other applicants who proposed to become owner occupants, but staff did not concur with their proposals as they did not meet the minimum standards for financial capacity and the rehabilitation scope of work. Are there any questions for me?
Thank you. Are there any questions for staff? Seeing none, I will open the public hearing. Are there any speakers signed in to speak on this item? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing. Is there a motion on this item?
Councilmember Ellison again. I will move approval.
Councilmember Ellison has moved this item for approval. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, clerk will call the roll.
Councilmember Reich.
Aye.
Gordon.
Aye.
Fletcher.
Aye.
Cunningham.
Aye.
Ellison.
Aye.
Goodman.
Aye.
Kano.
Aye.
Schrader.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Palmisano.
Aye.
Jenkins.
Aye.
President Bender.
Aye.
There are 12 ayes.
That carries, and that item will go to council on Friday as well. That concludes the public hearings. Thank you all for that. That leaves us with our one discussion item for today. And this is the proposal to revisit our council structure and to accommodate the process to adopt the amended budget in June, as we discussed at the council meeting on Friday. The clerk and I have both sent around materials related to this item, and they are all listed on the printed agenda or the online version of the agenda for my colleagues and the public. So as we continue to experience the pandemic and our shifts in governance that is bringing, in part due to the remote nature of our meetings now, and in part because of our new governance structure under the emergency declaration, I know we're all working together to really serve our community with the same transparency and the same quality that our constituents are used to. And I think in Minneapolis, we should be very proud of the level of accessibility and transparency that we have in our government. So those are the values that are really coming to bring this proposal forward, especially as we look at the best way that we can make the relatively urgent decisions needed to amend our budget due to the economic factors that Councilmember Palmisano described earlier, but also maintain time and the ability for the public to participate in our decisions. So one of the items that we sent around was a shift in the council structure to reestablish our budget committee. As you know, that includes all members of the city council. And this will enable us to have that separate committee that's meeting on its own time to take up items specific to the budget. In this case, a presentation of the mayor's proposed budget by staff, a public hearing on that proposed budget, a markup of our budget. And then from there, the items would go to the full city council for our final public hearing and final adoption as usual. So the resolution that we'll be talking about and considering today will look at reestablishing that budget committee. Because of all of the meetings that it will take to handle those items that I talked about, including the hearings and presentations and markups, I'm proposing to shift our council cycle back to a 2-week cycle so that the BIZ, POGO, and city council meetings would now become bi-weekly instead of weekly. If you look at the calendar, adding in those budget meetings makes it basically impossible to accommodate all those meetings in an electronic format like this. And I think we've also experienced some issues with that weekly cycle, both for council members to get information that they need to share with the public, for staff to have time to respond and react to directives from the council or questions. So I think the 2-week cycle will give us a little bit more breathing room. We also are seeing a lower frequency of new regulations coming from the mayor's office. So that, that update would now come every other week from the mayor at our council meetings rather than weekly. But I think given the pace at which decisions are being made under the emergency declaration, that will still feel comfortable, I hope, to the council and to the public. The last thing I wanted to talk about before turning it over to the clerk was just a little bit of logistics around the shifting. So we were talking about having just a 2-week process for the budget, taking all of the feedback that we heard, my own concerns about that. We've shifted to add just a few more days to that process, so it would go into the following Tuesday. That will give a week between the markup of our budget and final adoption of our budget, which is more like our typical process. And that eats into what was a scheduled ward work week. So we've shifted that to start in the next day and go into the week. So it would be a midweek to midweek ward work week, but would enable folks to still have that time to catch up on regular work and do all the things that happen during ward week, and then resume back to that 2-week cycle after the budget is adopted. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Carl to add a little more detail, and then of course there'll be time for questions and comments as well.
Madam Chair, an excellent summary as always. I have nothing more to add, but would be happy to help you in responding to questions your colleagues may have.
Great, thank you. Are there any questions or comments from council members? Councilmember Palmisano.
Thank you, Council President, and thank you, Casey Carl, as our city clerk. You are always diligent in detailing out all of the things that are needed to make these kinds of shifts that are largely invisible to the public. You know, I don't think that the public necessarily realizes that we council members and mayor are not the ones actually doing the crunching of the numbers, but rather there are staff from several departments who are working tirelessly on this revised budget and preparing for what will be very in-depth budget committee meetings. And I do think that this is the most transparent thing that we can do as a city council during this time, is to go through the process, the very difficult, challenging process of revising our city's budget. There's a lot of work that goes into making sure that council members and the public have all the information that we need to have meaningful discussion, and making sure that staff are set up to provide that environment, including all of the logistics that go into arranging a meeting, is really vital. So thank you, Council President, for considering this change, and thank you to Casey and others for all of your work and helping us come up with a plan of how we can accommodate this.
Thank you, Councilmember Palmisano. And as our budget chair, we really rely on you to both help manage the process side, that public-facing side of our budget, but also to so much behind the scenes, supporting of council members, supporting of staff. So we're really grateful for all of the work that you've already started to do on each of those pieces. Councilmember Gordon.
Thank you, and I appreciate that too. I just wanted to clarify that we'll be having a final council meeting on the budget on July 2nd. Is that true?
Mr. Carl will have I don't believe so. I believe the final meeting is June 30th.
June 30th.
Madam President, you're correct. It's scheduled to be an adjourned session of the council meeting on Tuesday, June 30th, and that would be the only item on the agenda is consideration and final action on whatever the final formatting of that amended budget would be coming out of the budget committee. Again, adjourned session on Tuesday, June 30th.
I appreciate that, and that's fine with me. I think I was also comfortable with pushing it out a little further to the second. The one thing that I noted when I looked at the calendar, so with the materials, the background materials that the clerk sent us, there was a new 2020 council and committee calendar, and it did have the new limited committee structure on it, but it went all the way out through the end of the year. And that was a little bit of a emotional shock to me. And I just wanted to, for the record, I'm hopeful that we may be able to adjust back. I'm convinced that we do better work, and we did better work when we had our committee structure where committees could dig in more to specific items. And we had a few more committees than we have now, and when we could actually meet in person. And I'm not giving up hope that we won't get there before the end of the year. But I see that we'll be approving a different calendar and a different format for now, and we'll have to come back and adjust that should we have the opportunity to meet again in person and perhaps meet more regularly as our committees to do more of our work.
Madam President, with your permission, I would only respond to that to say I appreciate, Councilmember, your comments. It was easier for us on the clerk's office to project the rest of the year. When we first started shifting to a 1-week cycle, the clerk's office was taking 1 week at a time, and that proved to be more work than simply making one big change. And so at the council's discretion, whenever that schedule is to be changed or there are other amendments and changes to the processes or operations of City Council, including the number of its committee meetings, we can make that change just as easily. So it was a matter of convenience on our office and not intended to give any indication of how long this amended structure would last.
As I suspected anyway, but still wanted to make that note. Thank you.
Thank you. And as Mr. Carl noted, that was a clerical decision that the clerk's office made. But I think you raised an important point that I'm sure is on council members' minds and members of the public as well. In my thinking, I think it's logistically impossible to host 11 standing committees remotely, which is our typical committee structure. And so I think the iterative process that we'll have to follow around council structure follows our decisions to make about whether or not we can meet in person and when, how we accommodate the public, including those folks who may be at risk for COVID or in high risk populations that would not be able to participate in person, even if restrictions further loosen, how we would make physical accommodations to the chambers to accommodate at least what our current social distancing recommendations for our workplaces, so that council members, of course, are safe, but also all of the staff who are also part of those meetings as well. So I think we are also welcoming a new colleague in late August. So I think that we will likely revisit our council structure and calendar as we go. And again, giving as much time and notice to the public as we can so that folks who want to participate and follow along can do that. But I also really hear from you, and I think others, the desire for council members who have leadership in particular subject areas and relationships with staff, because they're the chair of a committee or because that they're a council member who's really involved in those issues, as we move forward, a strong desire for council members to be in those roles. We also know that the staff priorities have shifted dramatically right now, and as we enter into this budget process, we'll likely have further impacts on our workforce and capacity to do work. So all of those things, I think, are factors in how we structure ourselves both internally and how we interact with the public. Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions or comments on this? I've had a lot of really great and thoughtful discussions with many of you about this and how we best structure our work. So just appreciate it. All those who have put a lot of thought into this, even if you're not making comments now. I don't see any more comments on this item, so I will move adoption of the resolution and the associated staff directions. Those are related to the calendar items. Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Councilmember Reich.
Aye.
Gordon.
Aye.
Fletcher.
Aye.
Cunningham.
Aye.
Ellison.
Aye.
Goodman. Aye. Cano.
Aye.
Schrader.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Homosano.
Aye.
Jenkins.
Aye.
President Bender.
Aye.
There are 12 ayes.
That carries, and that will forward to the full City Council meeting on Friday. With that, we've concluded all of our business before the POGO committee. I know Councilmember Cano had something she wanted to share before we adjourn.
Thank you, Madam President. I just wanted to do two things. Number one, apologize to my colleagues for giving some inaccurate information. Last time, Local Progress did not have their Sunday night convening, and it wasn't until after I had shared the news with you all that I got a text message saying that it had been postponed. So apologies, but please do plug into the Local Progress work. I think they've been having really amazing Sunday night convenings with elected officials from multiple levels of government talking together about important issues relating to COVID-19 response, and these are people from all over the country. However, the next announcement is true, in fact, and is happening. I've been in touch with the organizers about this more recently. So it's in relationship to the canceled rent and the mortgage payment issue related to COVID-19. So that is a webinar being hosted this Thursday, May 21st. At 11 a.m. It's a 1 hour long webinar. And so it's going to be 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. And then there is a series of folks who are a part of it. So the folks who are sponsoring the webinar are Policy Link, the Center for Popular Democracy, the Partnership for Working Families, People's Action, the Right to the City Alliance, the Alliance for Housing Justice, and the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights. And locally, Inquilinos Unidos is going to be a part of the panel that's being featured that day. So I'll forward you all this information that I have via email, but just wanted to make this a public invite for members who of the public and of our council who might want to join it. So once again, this Thursday, May 21st, 11 a.m. It's a 1-hour webinar to cancel rent to reclaim our homes. And it's about strategies to advance equitable housing in the COVID-19 response efforts. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Cano. That concludes our agenda today. So without objection, we are adjourned. Thank you.